So with me today, we've got the man who actually broke the story, our football correspondent, David Ornstein, also reporter Adam Crafton, as well as Barcelona correspondent Pol Ballus as well. Right, David, let's start with you on this one. I mean, you wrote in your article, this was a bit of a surprise. How did Manchester United manage to secure the services of Omar Berrada? And how also, how much of a statement, if you think about it, is this in terms of intent from INEOS's position?
Yeah, Ayo, the first thing to say is that United, INEOS, have been looking for a chief executive since the departure of Richard Arnold, and Patrick Stewart has been holding the role on an interim basis. And so their search is not fresh or a surprise. However, the candidate that they decided upon certainly is. And it feels to me from all the sort of calls and checks we've made that the particular pursuit of Berrada was very recent. Now, no doubt they were doing their due diligence and would have got endorsements over many weeks, months, and even the year-long process that they've been trying to invest in Manchester United. But actually going for him seems to have happened really in the last few weeks. And they did it under the radar. So it appears to have been a very discreet and quiet, quick, and slick operation, which you don't normally associate with Manchester United under the Glazer regime. But perhaps that's because it was driven by INEOS. They seem to have sort of identified Berrada and embarked upon getting an agreement with him. They did that, clearly. He resigned from Manchester City. And we started to hear rumblings that Manchester United had a chief executive in place, that INEOS had their man. So then you make checks about who it could be. And eventually we got to the position that we were able to break the story. And it really has sent shockwaves through the industry. I'm not saying our story, but the news of the appointment, because Omar Berrada, who is very, very highly regarded throughout the game, and we'll come on to talk about that and his track record, etc., was so fundamental and core to the Manchester City setup. And he'd moved from Barcelona to City in 2011, and he's worked his way through various positions at City within the City Football Group as a wider multi-club model, from the business side onto the football side. And now he's sort of doing the deals at City. He's alongside Cheeky Begirstein, who's really the football expert, and Omar Berrada, focusing on the numbers and the finances and the salaries and the commissions, and is said to be very sharp on that. Also taking a big role on the academy side and women's football at City as well, and had come to this point where it's very sort of well thought of throughout an industry that is pretty catty normally. People often talk bad of each other, but the feedback we've had on him is, overwhelmingly positive, I would say. And so it was an ambitious pursuit from Manchester United. The Glazers, who of course remain the majority shareholders, approved INEOS's recommendation. So it's being described as a joint appointment. And it was very swiftly after our story announced by Manchester United. He will take executive leadership on business and football. He will have a seat on the board of directors. He will report into ownership. We suspect he will build a team around him. There's no anticipation that he will start immediately. It's looking more likely in the summer. But this seems to be a poaching of the highest order, and one because of the proximity of the clubs that few, if any of us, saw coming. City's response has been really calm. Pretty classy, actually. No animosity, no bad mouthing. They're really comfortable and confident in their existing setup. The executives they have, from Khaldun Al-Mubarak to Ferran Soriano, Cheeky Begirstein, Brian Marwood, and others across the operation. They're the best in the world, factually, by virtue of the trophies that they've won. They would see themselves as being years ahead of Manchester United, and it will be Berrada's job to help close the gap somewhat. And in the meantime, City will be optimistic that they will continue to succeed and stretch away from all opposition, including United, and not feel the departure of Berrada as harshly as some may like to imagine.
Yeah, Adam, do you think there's a bit of a local pride here? United prizing away one of City's decent, very good assets.
Yeah, probably. I mean, look, as David said, United have needed this. Well, they've needed quite a few hires. They need a chief executive. They need a sporting director, possibly a head of recruitment. Who knows? Possibly a head coach as well. As they look to kind of build out this football operation over the next few months or so, since the Jim Ratcliffe I suppose partnership shareholding has taken place, waiting for it to be fully ratified. I thought this one was always going to be interesting because we weren't quite sure, where does CEO fall in terms of the responsibilities, right? Is it, if the Glazers are still the majority owners of the football club, but Jim Ratcliffe has almost got franchised out the sporting operations, where does a CEO fall in all of that? Is it a football operation thing, or is it whatever the Glazers are still doing at the club, whether that's commercial, business development, all those kind of things? It's not like when a player sort of goes from City to United. I think some of these kind of more executive roles or backroom roles happens quite often because, it's two clubs that can pay similarly well with, similar opportunities, sometimes poach from one another. But yeah, it's a statement that United are relatively serious in terms of what they're trying to do. But I think there's also some really, really big questions that come out of this that we'll get onto.
Yeah, Paul, I'm just interested from your perspective. I know you used to keep your eye on Manchester City, and also you're out in Spain with Barcelona. What kind of man is coming into Manchester United? Because I read your piece, and you get a sense of someone who's clearly very, very ambitious.
Yeah. He comes across as a really ambitious man, but not like in a bad way. I think that everyone at City, like the perspective and the way that everyone got to know him, was to see him as a perfect operator, as a loyal executor. And basically a person that earned the confidence and the trust of City's top executive because of himself, because of he basically deserves it. As just David pointed out, he made his way up to City, like starting from a relatively low position, like in partnerships, in a department which is not one of the biggest one in the club, and he made himself like the biggest guy in the football operations. Basically, now, if you spoke like to people like close to City or working at City or around City, last year, they would have said easily that Omar Berrada was probably like the most influential man in terms of like all the activities related to the club, because Ferran Soriano is more linked to the City Football Group. Chiqui Begiristain is linked to sporting direction of the first team signings, but also like dealing with Pep, making sure that all the queries or questions that Pep might have are well taken by the club. But then Omar was just not at the same level as Chiqui Begiristain, like in the sporting direction, and this is just to take that a lot of agents that have dealt with City over the last years, they just conclude that this looked like a fact that they were like in the same level. But as David was saying here, he was involved like with the women's team, with the academy. He had like his fingers all across the club because the club relied on him. And as well as City, as David was saying, are confident in like the model and the structure that the club has built. This is a big blow. This is a big blow because like a top man that was really trusted by a club within its run has a sense of a bit of a family-run club, Man City, like in some ways, because there's like so few people based in Manchester taking decisions like in the first team, and Omar was one of them. And to take them to take one of those guys out of City, and especially to bring it to United, which has like a different edge, it's a big move. It's a big move, of course.
Yeah, I wonder why City will let him go. I mean, did they have a similar policy as they do with players? If you don't want to be there, you're happy to go. But this is he's such an instrumental part of what they're looking to build. And from the sounds of it, felt like there was space for him, maybe a bit further up, as the director of Manchester City.
I think that, like, without having all the details of his contract, or what you get from City when you ask about those sort of things, not only with players, but with the executive and academy directors leaving the club as well, you get the feeling that if they want to leave at some point, they will leave, and especially like if they are top guys or top personalities or top executive or players, just as Omar Berrada, or like in footballers, it has happened like with Gabriel Jesus, with Leroy Sané. Just when they ask to leave, they tend to find a solution. And with Omar Berrada, I think that inside the club, they knew that he had the potential to be working for another like a sporting institution. Like as David reported for The Athletic, I think last year, he had been poached and approached by NFL franchises. And like this was a thing that inside City, they just believed and thought that he would be ready to work. I don't know. I'm just setting an example, but for Los Angeles Lakers here, or just for any institution that he would have aimed for, basically. And the fact that he signed for Man United, I guess that for some inside City might be seen as like not a betrayal, because this is a hard word, but I think that, yeah, as I was saying, it has like a different edge going from City to United, and that's how some people at City will take it from sure.
I'm just thinking in terms of from an INEOS perspective, Adam. Sir Jim Ratcliffe coming into the club wanting to make a statement. This is a big enough statement to say, do you know what? I've got connections. I can pull some strings here to get some of the best in class, as you said, coming to Manchester United.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was just looking at Omar Berrada's LinkedIn page, and it looks like someone who's been going through a job process. His kind of bio on LinkedIn has about 400, almost 400, 500 words at the moment, sort of detailing everything he's achieved at Man City, at Barcelona previously, as well. So I think clearly, yes, United have lured him, but I think also, I think we forget sometimes that Manchester United, the opportunity to be CEO of Manchester United is still a hugely appealing thing, particularly when I think the pitch probably at the moment is come and lead this cultural reset. It's a really difficult job actually, because he's going to have to be almost the glue between the Glazers and the Ratcliffe INEOS operation. Now, that could get difficult at certain points, right? Like, let's see how that relationship between those two investment partners develop. But that's basically his job, to be that glue between two different regimes trying to achieve the goal of kind of restoring Manchester United. I thought the statement Man United put out on Saturday night was fascinating, where that wording came from. I mean, the statement basically said, this is one of the first steps, I'm paraphrasing here, but one of the first steps in putting football and performance back at the heart of what Manchester United do. I mean, extraordinary admission, for United to basically be admitting, I'm not sure what they've been doing for the past 10 years, because football and performance haven't been at the heart of it. That's kind of what that statement was saying. This guy's going to lead us back to doing that. So is that something I could have imagined the Glazers saying before the Ratcliffe and INEOS came in? Probably not, to be honest. I think there are like some open questions around this hire. You have the question of, one of the things we've seen with so many of these people that have left Brighton over the past year or so, year and a half, is when you're part of a winning machine, a successful machine, as for example Brighton have been, and then you see Graham Potter leave, or you see Paul Winstanley go to Chelsea, or you see Moises Caicedo or Mark Cucurella. Lots of different examples of people who leave very smoothly run organizations where from the outside they look like a genius because they're part of this really well-run, smooth organization, and then they go in somewhere else and they either shrink or disappear a little bit, or they find it more difficult to really exert their abilities. And what we're not quite sure of yet with Omar Berrada is, was he one impressive part of a well-oiled machine, or is he individually really fantastic at what he does? And that's one of the things I think we're going to find out. And then the other question is, Manchester City have been accused of all sorts of things with regards to commercial, with regards to their commercial department for a very long time. And this guy was head of partnerships. And, I know that some of the briefings seem to be that, Omar Berrada didn't have any involvement with all of this, but you can't simultaneously hold the position that Omar Berrada is a genius that's been at the heart of Manchester City's operations at the same time as saying Omar Berrada had nothing to do with anything that was going on at Manchester City. So I think these are some of the questions that are kind of open as we move forward. And I struggle to see how, if those charges of breaches are proven against Man City, how the now future CEO of Manchester United isn't impacted in some way by that reputationally.
Yeah, and Adam's if is crucial because, as we always remind our audiences, City vehemently deny the charges and are adamant that they are going to prove their innocence with irrefutable evidence. And they really are bullish when you talk to people inside the club. It would be the most seismic story in probably English or maybe even European football history in this nature, certainly with the running of clubs and financial repercussions on a scale of maybe the sort of FIFA corruption scandal. So that's something that needs to come to a head at some point soon. Richard Masters, the Premier League chief executive, said that they have sort of got a date penciled in now. He wouldn't give any further details. So perhaps we'll learn more on that. And it does generate multiple questions. Just flipping over to one of Adam's other points on Berrada's track record, there's a really good piece by Pol on The Athletic, which sort of details how when he was at Barcelona, where he joined from Tiscali on the sort of media and marketing commercial side, he wasn't actually known by Ferran Soriano, Txiki Begiristain, Pep Guardiola, who were at Barcelona at the time. He then joined Manchester City first in 2011 before any of them, and they followed. And he has kind of blended in to the inner sanctum, but he isn't Catalan. He's Parisian born, of Moroccan descent, speaks 4 languages, and he sort of assimilated into that group. I was looking back over a number of pictures of City's success, and it's always the Catalan guys together, maybe with a couple of others who have been key and are part of that group. And it's always assumed that when they move on, they'll move on pretty much together. Maybe Pep Guardiola will go first and Txiki Begiristain afterwards a year later as a bit of a transition. But Omar Berrada is in very, very few of those photos of City's successes. Maybe there's one selfie I remember seeing from Pep Team on social media where he appears at the bottom of the screen. But otherwise, it's not clear if he was fully part of that absolute core that they were in, even though he had risen to be absolutely fundamental in decision making and worked hand in glove with Txiki Begiristain on the football side in more recent times, and was clearly trusted by Pep Guardiola. And what I mean by that is you always wonder, and this is what we're starting to hear when we're having conversations to build subsequent stories on The Athletic, that he's really ambitious. So he wanted to sort of be the main man somewhere, wherever that might have been in world football. And Pol points out that we did some reporting suggesting that there were some approaches from, I think, NFL franchises for chief executive roles. So, some believe that he would have been a very strong candidate to succeed Ferran Soriano. Perhaps he was even being prepared for that. The City have pushed back on that a little bit, and there's no sign of Ferran Soriano leaving. And perhaps that was one of the considerations for Omar Berrada. When is my time going to come to get to that position? And simultaneously, you're being offered it by one of the biggest clubs in world football, a project that, if it works, the rejuvenation of Manchester United on the pitch, the stadium, and so much more besides, it has unbelievable potential. How often does this sort of position come around at that sort of club? And so when you look at that, you sort of see the reasons that may have led him to this decision. And I think, Ayo, you said something about City letting him go. Well, it was a resignation, so it doesn't appear that they've had much say in it. Their statement was short and to the point. They wished him well, but it didn't really elaborate further. You would assume that there's some people that are pretty disappointed about this within City, even though they've been amicable in his departure. And City will need to find a replacement, whether it's from within or from external. But there are lots of questions about this. And the other point I wanted to make, sorry to bang on, is that this is Manchester United's local rival here, and there is a lot of competitiveness, and that's not just at first team or academy or women's level. It's in the commercial side as well. You know, there will be some who see this inside United as a coup, and there may be others who are a bit threatened, who feel nervous, who didn't like the work that was taking place at Manchester City, and now that's going to be coming to Manchester United. There could be some sort of internal resistance. We know and have read and have documented about a lot of the problems at United in recent times, and Adam points to the United statement, like, who was behind that? Do INEOS drive these sort of things now? Because in the investment documentation, it sort of mentions how there's non-disparagement clauses. I don't know if that's the actual word. And this kind of admission of putting football performance back at the heart is almost disparagement against the sort of previous setup. So perhaps what we are seeing here is an INEOS takeover. INEOS, Jim Radcliffe, have ambition to be the outright owners of Manchester United further down the line. And maybe this is them saying, this is our man, this is our project. We're going to bring in more of our own people. We're going to shake things up because it's not been working. And, you know, it's just one appointment. It's not the cure to all ills. They're going to have to do a lot of work to rebuild United. This is a club that will be irrecognizable to what Omar Berrada has experienced at Manchester City for so many years.
I guess, yeah, the bigger question is, from a Manchester United perspective, is what will he bring to the role in comparison to previous CEOs, Adam?
Well, hopefully less than Ed Woodward did, in the sense of, you know, hopefully he won't be getting involved in the way that Ed Woodward did at certain times. It depends, really. You know, Manchester United have had 4 CEOs, I suppose, in recent memory. So you had David Gill, who, you know, was very highly, I suppose, respected, but also had the benefit of working with the best manager ever at the football club in Sir Alex Ferguson. You then had the crazy Ed Woodward years, where the club just made kind of careered from one mistake to another, despite growing pretty well commercially. From the football operations point of view, it was a pretty unmitigated disaster, culminating in the Super League and him then resigning. And then as well, you have Richard Arnold, who came in after Ed Woodward. His approach was actually to step back, really, from the football side of it and massively delegate football operations. I think his view was, you know, I'm not an expert in this field of recruitment and relationships with agents and all of that kind of thing, so I'm going to delegate that to John Murtagh, the football director, and the manager, Erik ten Hag. But he then also had, you know, major reputational issues when you look at everything that happened with the Mason Greenwood situation in the summer, and huge issues in terms of staff morale and things like that. But also a very difficult job because, you know, he was kind of at, I suppose, like the drag ends of the sole Glazer ownership. So not an easy job. So what do Manchester United now want from a CEO? You know, as I said, I think they want someone who is a glue between the two ownerships. I think they want someone who has experience in how you continue to grow a commercial property and a commercial asset, which, you know, Manchester United have been very good at, but they'll always be looking at other ways to do that. So there may be things that he can bring into that. But again, it's one of those of, like, you almost have to look a little bit closer at what he was doing at Barcelona compared to Man City, because we don't, until all of this stuff with Man City is concluded, we don't know how real some of that commercial success has been at Manchester City. Obviously, they say it's completely real. But then that you also want some football expertise, right? I don't think it's sustainable to have a chief executive who basically says, I don't want anything to do with football, right? And I'm just gonna work on the commercial and the numbers, because there are points in deals where a CEO or sometimes even an owner has to get involved to get a deal over a line. Like that's just the reality of it. So there'll be points where, you know, people like Ferran Soriano or Daniel Levy or Paul Ballus at Brighton, at Tottenham, get involved and get a deal over the line. I think that's something which maybe the guys can speak to a bit more. I think with the Erling Haaland deal, where Omar Berrada had a role in that, has some experience with that. Omar Berrada being amazing once he gets in a room and getting a deal over a line, or how much of it is actually just the conditions of the club he was working at. And I think that's what we're going to kind of learn more about.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, Paul. I mean, yes, of course, Pep Guardiola, but he was also technically at City at a time where they were still struggling to get some sort of commercial success as well, or trying to convince people that this was a viable project, would you say?
Yeah, exactly. And back in the days, actually, it was like a big motivation, I think, for Omar Berrada, joining a club that had this margin of like growing and this perspective of like getting bigger. For the job that he was doing back then when he joined City, that was a big reason basically to decided to switch his life and just to move from Barcelona to London in that case to start working for City. But yeah, I mean, I agree with all the points that Adam was making here. I think that part of the way that we will have to assess his job, or we will have to deem if he has succeeded or not, will be part of, I mean, will be made by the team that he assembles. I don't picture him without having like more of a sporting director profile, just as Chico Begiristain was doing it. Because I think that this has been the model that he's been working in at City and that has been successful. And I think that, well, it's like pretty much established that it's one of the ones that is being more used in the football industry. And I think that at Man United as well, he will have to. I mean, I was mentioning this thing that at City, the club seems at some points run by sort of a family thing, because there are like not so many people involved, like in big decisions, and Omar was one of them. United from the outside seems like a very different thing to us, to that basically. I think that Omar will need to deal with an amount of politics that he wasn't used at City, which is something that he will have to, I don't know, fight against, or he will have to find his way through. But at the same time, I also think that it's going to be not easy, but pretty doable to improve like the results or the standards that Adam has well explained at Manchester United over the last years. But yeah, now it's a challenge for him not to be the guy who adapts himself into the position that the club is requiring from him, which is basically what he has been doing at City, but to be the guy that calls the shot, assembles the team, make the decision when they need a signing. He makes a step forward just to meet with the player and to bring that personality into the table. So yeah, that's going to be like an interesting move, and I think that possibly the main thing from which we are going to say if he has been a success or not.
No, so it was just like, Wayne Rooney talking about Whitney and who he's picking up from work in the morning and all that sort of stuff. And clearly Omar Berrada fell into that category as well. So, fair play. Fair play to him for that. I think, like, if he does a good job, none of that stuff will matter. But I did find it first quite funny that sort of Man United's new CEO made his sort of first mishap as CEO minus 12 years ago. So that feels like record time.
I guess this sort of City background, more than the tweets, probably puts you on a bit of a back foot if you're in such a high profile position. You've got to prove people wrong. I sense that'll be more internal than external, as is often the way with these things in this day and age. A lot of the social media reaction has been really positive. People have been sharing video clips of Berrada talking at events about how he's run things at City in his career. There's a clip of he and Chiqui Begiristain sitting, looking in front of a screen, talking through salary controls and recruitment ideas and things like that. And that's always going to be a hit with a lot of the public, especially when Manchester United have experienced a recruitment operation in the last 10 years or so that has left a lot to be desired and has been quite heavily criticised. But internally, there will need to be a lot of work, as we know, and restructuring and points to prove. And no doubt he will bring huge qualities and experience from his previous setup that United perhaps have been lacking. And to Adam and Pol's points about his involvement in some of the things. Yeah, he was operating in a different stratosphere because of City's setup, his colleagues, the finances, the ownership involved. We did do quite a bit of reporting on his close involvement in the Erling Haaland transfer, for example, and the way he negotiated with Mino Raiola, who has since died, sadly, and that deal came about with this person suddenly, who was a commercial and marketing person at City, now absolutely in the center of their recruitment operation. That really is quite a remarkable shift that wouldn't have placed him there at an organization that is so hungry and ambitious and fiercely competitive and holds themselves to sort of high standards and is desperate to win and keep winning and win better. If it wasn't merited, not too dissimilar on the Jack Grealish transfer, and right up until recently, like the Echeverri deal, the young Argentine player who did so well at the Under-17 World Cup, who City have signed. People say that right up until that deal just before Christmas was done, that Berrada was driving it and sort of even swung it maybe in City's direction with no hint of being on the way out of the club, which underlines that this has probably been really recent. And so the sort of ingredients are there, but Adam's right, the new environment and the maybe scrutiny and the points he will have to prove, perhaps some skepticism in there, are no small matter.
Yeah, I think as well, the one thing we've not mentioned is obviously City, the City Football Group is this huge multi-club model, clubs all over the world. And Manchester United are kind of moving into that space because INEOS have clubs in, obviously, Nice in France, they've got Lausanne in Switzerland, United. It makes me wonder whether there are plans for INEOS to go sort of further into this multi-club model as well. I don't know. Obviously, we know they are multi-sport. That you've got the team INEOS cycling, and they've got they've got sailing enterprises. So that there's different things going on there. That clearly he is adept at working within that multi-club group. I think David's right that there'll be kind of I think there'll be a bit of internal anxiety at Manchester United. You've already got basically a new owner to a certain extent. You've got this presence of Dave Brailsford, who's the director of sport INEOS. You've also got the Jean-Claude Blanc, who's kind of the CEO of the INEOS group overall, the sports INEOS group overall, and Jim. And then also you've got this new CEO coming in. But, Man United have, this kind of leadership team that I think, maybe some members of that leadership team will have been thinking, could I have been up for this job? Right, as well. And then also there's big hires to come in the summer. You've got what are Manchester United going to do about a new sporting director? What does that mean for John Mercer, the football director? I think Erik ten Hag has a huge amount to prove ahead of the summer. The head of the head coach of Man United's women's team. I was at Stamford Bridge yesterday and saw Man United lose 3-1 at Chelsea, and the fans of the women's team are pretty unhappy at the moment with Mark Skinner. So there's big decisions to be made across the football club, and it'll be interesting to see how much Omar Berrada is able to do. I mean, officially, he probably can't do anything for 6 months or so, but Man United have some big calls to make, and it's hard to imagine that he won't be subtly consulted in the way that people are but aren't during these periods of kind of notice and things like that.
But I mean, some could say United are getting ahead of themselves, right? Get the appointment made. He can start thinking about it. So, by the time he's ready to start his job, he's already made his notes and they're good to go, which is very different to what we've been seeing with a very recent Manchester United.
Yeah, what United or their fans seem to be very excited about is how well they've moved in this process. It was pretty ruthless, and they've come out with a candidate, and let's reserve judgment on how it's going to go, but has the ingredients that the people, the public, the club wanted and seem to need. So that's a good initial sign. It suggests that INEOS mean business. So many decisions took so long under full Glazer reign. Whether it was new contracts, player signings, academy, senior moves, day-to-day stuff as well. It all had to go up to sort of Joel Glazer and come back. There were time difference issues. It was not best practice. And this early step suggests that they're on to a slightly better thing, at least from a process perspective. But I'm really intrigued by what happens next, because all the talk so far has been about a sporting director, Dan Ashworth, Paul Mitchell, all these names floating around, heads of recruitment. Who's it going to be? And there was an assumption that Jean-Claude Blanc, after it was announced he would take a seat on the board, would be chief executive. But we were starting to hear, no, actually, that they'll go for somebody else. And it's going to be the first thing they do. And now it's the first thing they've done. What happens with the other roles? Because Omar Berrada wasn't a voice in the room before Sir Dave Brailsford, Jim Ratcliffe and Jean-Claude Blanc were looking for this sporting director. There were countless reports of shortlists and things. But if you're empowering this chief executive, he'll have his own ideas. He'll have his own connections. He'll look maybe into different areas. He might not like some of those that were on the initial radar. And it could shape up very differently to how we were initially being led to believe, admittedly through sort of speculation more than concrete facts. And I just wanted to throw it over to Pol. Do you think that Omar Berrada has the sort of the power in his skill set, the authority, the decisiveness, the cojones, as some like to describe it, to go into this operation and say, I'm going to pick these people, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to... It might not be easy. There might be awkward conversations inside, but that's what we need to do. That ruthless streak that many have been looking for at United.
I think it's basically the challenge that he was sort of looking for. He has the aura of being like a silent person, like in power, like a silent decision maker, like a person that from the background makes himself like feel important, basically, like in meetings. Like a lot of like Asians from City players or former City players, when David broke the story on Omar Berrada, basically texted me like saying like, is this true? Is this going to happen? And they, all of them, like highlighted like really how important Omar Berrada was like in their decision to deal with City or just to proceed like with all the negotiations that they were in. So this makes me think like the way that external people valued him makes me think that he has the ambition as and like the decision just to make that step. And if you look back at his career, he's as you were like saying like at the start of it, he has like the desire just to keep progressing and just to keep doing more and more and more and more. And basically, I think that he has everything for that, but that doesn't mean that it will be successful or not. As we were saying, like it will depend on the team that he assembles. Let's see. I don't have a clue if he's going to rely on people that he's been working at City, if he's going to look for new profiles, but certainly this is going to be the key of it. And I would be like really surprised, as I was saying, if there's no like, if he doesn't want like to work like in a similar system that he had at City with the overlap with Chiqui Begiristain, taking into account how successful it was like at all in all terms, in all departments. So let's see how it goes. But I think that he has the character for it.
Adam, is it common? Sorry, Adam, is it common that you can go and take staff members in these sorts of moves, or is it almost and it's not the done thing, or there are contractual things put in place to prevent it? Because there doesn't appear to have been a non-compete in Berrada's deal, because despite having a period of gardening leave, he will be joining United from the summer, we believe.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends what's written in the contract, I suppose. But it's, you know, it's not unusual that in any company, right? Like people tend to want to take a couple of people that they know that they've worked with before, and things like that. Equally, sometimes people don't do that because they are almost out of goodwill and, you know, not wanting to sort of rattle even more cages than have already been rattled. But, you know, I don't get the impression that Manchester United would be nervous about doing that. Maybe Omar himself may be a little bit reticent. I don't know. But as you know, that will all depend what's written in contracts. But then on top of that, there's almost like an ethical layer, isn't there? Right?
United, the new city.
But it's only work, right? You know, when you boil it, you know, it's only someone's job. Like, you know,
who
like,
thought it would come full circle?
It's not an affair.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, Adam, you mentioned it briefly, but I'm just thinking Eric Ten Hag, isn't he not coming into the last year of his contract into after the summer? I mean, like like someone taking over a soap opera. You kill off the main character. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of the series, just to make a statement to say, look, I've got the kahunas, as David's saying. Let's start afresh under my regime.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be really interesting. I think there is an option, isn't there, David, to
Yep.
to extend. I'm not sure if that's just one side or whether both sides have to agree to that. So that could be triggered. That would be quite non-committal in some ways, just to trigger the option rather than to do a whole new contract. I'm really interested to see what Manchester United do, whether they kind of just view the first half of this season as, there's been so much going on at the club. Is it a real fair reflection of Ten Hag's ability as a coach? When you bring in the injuries and the off-field issues and the situations that have surrounded Greenwood and Anthony and all these different things that have kind of happened. But then you also bring in Ten Hag's recruitment. We don't want to sort of go into all of that now, but those are all the things that will be swilling around the heads of people like Jim Ratcliffe and Dave Brailsford and now Omar Berrada as well. And I think basically for the next few months where United are out of Europe, they've basically got a game a week for most of the rest of the season. Okay, they've got the FA Cup as well, but he's going to be getting players back fit. He has to demonstrate over the next few months that his team have a style of play and that they can consistently win matches. Because I think if they don't, and if the performances continue the way they are, which is pretty shapeless, lacking direction, purpose, poor defending, conceding goals at set pieces very cheaply, conceding the same kinds of goals from pullbacks, I think, it's hard to make a case, certainly to give Ten Hag a new contract, but maybe he clings on for a bit longer.
Pol, has he appointed managers in the past, sacked managers in the City setup since he's been on the football side? And also, sorry to go back to my sort of point about other potential arrivals, but he was the right-hand man to Txiki Begiristain, or by the end they were sort of working hand in glove. It will be fascinating to see if Manchester United look for a similar relationship. Who is going to be United's Txiki Begiristain that works alongside Berrada if they do try and replicate that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the full information, but I mean, I haven't been told that he's been the one to pull the trigger like in manager. I've been told that he's been the one, for example, like to assemble like some part of the structure of the women's team. So in terms of like setting up the whole infrastructure surrounding the team, he's been there. I don't think that he had like the capacities to, on a sporting level, as I was saying, pull a trigger. But now he will have to. Now he will have to. And I agree that it's going to be like interesting to see which is like his Txiki Begiristain, because as I was saying, I think that he will definitely go for that, go for like more like a sporting profile of a sporting director. And yeah, it's going to be like, really interesting to see who is the man that Man United trust in, knowing all this situation with the manager, because like this bond with the manager and the sporting direction has been a strong point at City. I mean, you cannot understand City's success with like this close relationship that Txiki has always had with Pep, and it's something that United or Omar surely will try to replicate. And this is like more of a complicated thing to do, possibly at United, for the amount of politics that you have to deal with. So let's see how it goes. I don't know if, and that's just an idea that just popped up into my mind now that we were like talking about managers and just everything. But knowing how very well admired was Roberto De Zerbi at Man City, I don't know. It's just like an idea. Of course, I don't have any background on this, but I don't know if it could be like a good idea just to start like a new project with your man, with your manager, and try to create this tough bond between the sporting direction and the coaching staff.
All right, let's finish now, right? Because we have referenced the 115 Premier League charges that have been put against Manchester City, and if you want more on that, scroll back to the feed to last Tuesday. And also in the meantime, you can also subscribe to The Athletic for $2 or £2 a month by heading to theathletic.com/football pod. Thanks for listening. We are back tomorrow. If you like this video, click subscribe for more content like this. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season to bring you the inside track to the biggest stories in football. If you'd like to listen to the full episodes for free, Search the Athletic Football Podcast wherever you get your podcasts from.